This is Paolo Rivera, and you're listening to the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.
Greetings, Cap fans, and welcome to episode 104 of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Verbanis, and as always, I'm joined by the best gosh darn co-host out there. That would be Mr. Bob Lucius. Hey, Bob. Hey, Bob, are you going to beat your gums today?
What the hell does that mean, Rick? Do I have something in my teeth? Do I have a floss?
No, Bob, we're going to beat your gums, yeah? You know what I mean? See, yeah. Yeah, no, that's slang from World War II. And it means we're going to talk a lot about a subject.
Oh, and what might that subject be tonight, Rick?
Well, we have a special guest today, Bob, and that would be a Paolo Rivera, who is a 20-year comic book vet artist. He's been a renowned painter, penciler. He's done over something like 200 covers, but he's also done a series of beautifully painted one-shots called Mythos. And we're going to be covering Captain America today, which took place in World War II. So there you go, Bob. It is World War II, talking a lot about a subject.
I like the depth of your research that you put into these things, Rick. It's astounding.
Thanks, Bob.
But it's also astounding that we're going to have Paolo on the show because I love Captain America Mythos. I love all the other Mythos, and I love his work. But Captain America Mythos has a special place in my heart, and I think yours as well.
It did. Like we just covered it last episode. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to that, go back and listen to episode 103, where we cover it panel by beautiful panel and give our thoughts on that issue. But yeah, today we're going to talk to Paolo Rivera. But also, Bob, I want to point out there in episode 108, just 4 weeks from today, our next guest is going to be Dr. Mark White. You remember Dr. White, don't you?
I surely do. That was a great interview that we had with him way back when.
Yeah, well, it was actually episode 30, which is like a year and a half ago. And for those who haven't checked out episode 30, make sure you do. He's the author of a book called The Virtues of Captain America. And so we thought it would be fun to have Professor White back on the show to talk about various, philosophical issues that are going on, whether in the past or contemporary, and then have the listeners call in with questions. And then Dr. White will give his response on what would Cap do in this situation. And then he, with all the research that he did on Captain America comic books, he can point to other times where it would lead one to believe that based on the past, this is what Cap would do in this situation. So I think that'd be a lot of fun. What do you think?
I do too. I do. Mark has he has an amazing referential knowledge of Captain America, but he's also a philosopher and has a background in ethics. And so it's a great confluence of specialties, Rick. And so I think it's going to be a lot of fun to throw some tough ones at him and see what he can do, if he can wrestle out what Cap would do.
Well, do you have a question in mind that you would like to ask, Dr.
Well,
White?
I mean, there's lots of questions, I think, in contemporary society that we could ask, what would Cap do? How would Cap handle this, right? And so maybe one of the ones, I know it's it's a bit controversial, but I'd say, gosh, what would Cap do about the divide we have in our country right now? How would he handle that, right? How would his virtues come into play into bridging the differences we have in our country?
Bob, I can always count on you to have some sort of well thought out and poignant approach to, the thought process and what you want to take a look at. But yeah, you know what I want to know, Bob? In the She-Hulk Disney Plus series, there was a little talk about, is Captain America a virgin?
Oh, that's right. That was more controversial
I
than
know, right?
everything else going on. Right.
Yeah. So
At least on Facebook.
That's what I bring to the show, Bob.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I'm gonna ask Dr. White. I'm gonna be like, so do you think Steve's a virgin? And why?
There you go. There
Yeah.
you go. That would be an interesting question.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it brings up ethics, morals, right? Things like that. So
yeah.
Anyway, so that'll be fine. So, and Bob, one of the things that is a special treat for our patrons, those who support the show on a monthly basis, they have the ability to ask questions to our guests. So we're going to put it out to them first, right? So to our patrons out there, you can go ahead and submit one of two ways. You can send us an email at capcomicfans@gmail.com. And the other way too is you can call in, right? Because we love hearing your voice. You can go to anchor.fm/Cap Comic Book Fans /message. And I'll put the link in the show notes. So you can just go there or on the Facebook page. And you can call in and you can leave us a message, and maybe we will play it for Dr. White and see what his response is. And then I know some of you out there are like, well, I want to submit a question. Well, you can too if you were a patron. So if you want to find out how you could be a patron, just go to our website, which is CaptainAmericaComicBookFans.com. And at the top or at the bottom, depending if you're on mobile or desktop or whatever, there is a place there of learning more about the different perks you get for being a patron. So not only if you sign up on the Shield Slinger level, will you be able to submit a question for our guests, but we'll also send you a What Would Cap Do challenge coin. So check that out on our website. But that'll be fun. So make sure listeners come back for episode 108 when we have Professor White on for our listener Q&A.
Absolutely, Rick. I mean, we are the one thing that you get, right? In addition to be able to ask questions, is that coin, and we're running on fumes for those, Rick. Right? I mean, we only had 100 made. It's a limited edition. They will not be produced again.
All right. Well, enough about that. Let's talk about today's guest. Right?
Mm-hmm.
We're both very excited to have Paolo Rivera on the show. So let's get to Paolo. While you may recognize Paolo Rivera's work on nearly 200 comic covers, as well as his interior work on Amazing Spider-Man and Daredevil, which, by the way, he won 2 Eisners and a Harvey Award, he is perhaps best known for his series of fully painted one-shots titled Mythos, which he created with writer Paul Jenkins. These self-contained stories explored the origins of some of Marvel's most beloved characters, including our favorite, Captain America. We're excited to have him as our guest today. Paolo, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So before we dive into Mythos, can you share with the listeners, how did you break into comics? I mean, your parents were both creative types. So, I mean, you could have gone in any direction, right? Creatively speaking. So why comics?
I mean, as soon as I wanted to draw anything, that's what I wanted to draw. Like, my parents had, I guess you could say, a more fine art bent. They had an art supply store back in the 80s in Daytona Beach, Florida. And it was actually a gallery as well. They would do framing, but it kind of morphed over the years into just mail order airbrush supplies, because that's kind of what my dad did. But for me, between cartoons and comic books, like there was never any chance I was going to do anything else. Like, my dad had wanted to do gallery art at one point in his life, but for me, it's just not something I ever wanted to do. I had a good friend in middle school who kind of wanted to go more that route, but it was just never for me. Like, we both love to draw and we both share that in common, but I always want to do cartoons and superheroes.
And how did you break in?
Well, back in like the direct route was back in high school. I used to go to comic book conventions, and in 1999, my parents took me to MegaCon in Orlando, Florida, and it was there that I met Jim Kruger and Alex Ross And Jim and I kept in contact over the years, and I did some work for his creator-owned books. And then that work is what eventually became my portfolio that he helped. He showed to Marvel. And then once I got to Marvel, I got in contact with Joe Quesada, and he's the one that like got me set up working there. And that was back in 2002. I think that's when I started at Marvel. So started with Jim back in, man, I was still in high school, and then at Marvel while I was still in college.
That's crazy.
yeah. It happened. It happened very quickly for me. So it's kind of weird, like looking back on it now, because I had some friends who were very talented, but it took them a lot longer to get in. So it was, you can really trace it back to just Jim Kruger and Joe Quesada, just like seeing my work and telling me, what I needed at the right time, and just hit the ground running.
Talk about hitting the ground running, right? I mean, you did a small, like a Dr. Doom story, right, to kind of start off, and then shortly, not too long after, I mean, you only had done at this point 2 interiors and 16 covers for Marvel, and then you land the Mythos gig with esteemed writer Paul Jenkins, right? And yeah. I read in your blog that you had only painted 34 pages for Marvel up until that point. So here you are at the young age of 25. And how did you land this great gig of taking on the origin stories of such iconic and beloved characters as the Hulk, X-Men, Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Ghost Rider, and Captain America?
I got real lucky. Basically, I think it was a combination of both my editors believing in me, and liking my work, and seeing that I was, I guess, dependable in some sense, or I should say, not dependable, truthful. I told them that, like, how long this stuff was going to take, and then the flip side of that is, how can you use someone who's that slow? And the answer is not going to be on a monthly book. So they liked my work well enough that they wanted to hire me, but they had to kind of create a special project to put me on, just so that I could hit the deadlines that they gave me. And so when they first gave me a project with Christopher Priest, that was part of a series of it was double shot. And it was 2 short stories, which was a monthly book, but they could move me around if things got dire. And in the second one, it was with Paul Jenkins, and that was part of the spectacular Spider-Man monthly series. But again, it was a one shot, so they could again move me around if things got bad. And so after working with me 2 times, they realized, okay, we need to give this kid lots of time. And that's what they did. That's what the Mythos books allowed, me to do.
Wow. Rick, I mean, rightfully so, says these are beloved characters. They're iconic characters. And you are a young guy, right? I mean, there are highly experienced folks out there at this time that might have been a little nervous about tackling a project that addresses the origin stories for these central Marvel characters. Did you have any trepidation, any nervousness about tackling such a project?
Yeah, all the time. Like, just nothing but nerves. Like, I don't know. I mean, I knew how important the project was. It ended up kind of morphing into something that from what they first described to me, partly because I was so slow. I came into Marvel at a very, very interesting time where they weren't like coming out of bankruptcy, but like things were going well. And on the other side of that, you had the movies kind of happening and doing really well. 2000, I think, was when X-Men came out. And so Marvel was becoming like this pretty well-known property just outside of comics. And by the time I got in there, I think, things were already moving behind the scenes to make some of these other movies. And so they wanted a set of origin stories that would be a good jumping off point for anyone who saw the movie and said, where do I start? It ended up morphing kind of away from, that specifically and just kind of being its own thing. But it did come at an important time, especially with like Captain America, where it did have some kind of influence on like the take of the movie and that kind of thing. So I kind of hit the sweet spot in terms of timing, definitely.
Yeah. So let's talk about the movie, right? Captain America: First Avenger came out 1.5 years after your Mythos of Captain America. Chris Evans has gone on record to state how much your comic helped prepare him for the role. And I'm going to quote Chris Evans here. There was a great comic book called Mythos that was the closest version to the story we're telling. The artwork was beautiful. It looked almost like it was all watercolor. That's what I kept by my side while we were filming. I did a bunch of research independently of the film script and just tried to soak up some knowledge of the comic book world because we're making this movie for the comic book fans. I mean, how much of a thrill was it to learn that Chris Evans based a lot of what he was doing and had your book by his side during filming?
I want to frame that and just put it up on my wall or maybe like write it out in Sharpie on a giant, aluminum shield or something.
Right.
Right.
I mean, that's just awesome. When I saw him mention that in an interview, I immediately like posted it to my blog and sent it to my mom, and just like, it was just awesome. And just it really showed me that the people who were involved with Marvel Studios specifically loved the comics and really did their homework. And actually, prior to that, I had gotten word that like they had my my very first Marvel cover. It was an Iron Man number 63. They had that up at Marvel Studios, and like they don't have to do that, but the fact that they did just meant to me that like they really loved the where the stuff was coming from. And and my comic cover to begin with was me just looking at old Marvel comic covers in general. I wanted to see all the suits and everything. And so there's always been this I guess respect for just the history of it and the creators who have come before you, and just trying to, I guess it's to reimagine it in some way. But I've always thought the movies did a really great job of kind of taking that source material and making it, a little bit more believable. Because it is, especially as a painter, it is a challenge because you want to be truthful to, let's say a Jack Kirby drawing. But when you're doing a fully painted Captain America comic, when I do like a Kirby painting, it feels like me just slapping my stuff on top of them. So I have to kind of take a different angle just to make it work in my mind.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about your methods, right? So can you take the listeners through the steps that you take when you are painting? So from the staging, the photographs, to the layouts, the penciling, the digital color study, to the final painted page.
Yeah, it's a long process. And of course it always starts with the script. So when in terms of Captain America, I got it from Paul Jenkins, and that script was just perfect. It was like the exact tone that we all wanted. And for me, it's actually what made me into a Captain America fan. Like I always knew who Captain America was, but I wasn't like a gung-ho fan of his from when I was a kid. It actually happened right around the time that I was working on that. And it was also a nice excuse to kind of learn more about World War II. So I get the script. Sometimes I'll actually make notes and stuff right directly on the script. I usually, at that time, I would always print it out. Now I do it all digitally, but it's still the same thing. It's like, it's a digital file, but I'm still like writing on the script, like what I need to do. And then I do a layout. Back in the day, it was a 4x6 drawing, just a pencil, just planning out everything. Usually I take things kind of panel by panel and just do, whatever strikes my mind first. I'll just draw it out there as best I can. That always changes as things move on. And once I try and create some flow on the page, because it's all about real estate. It's like, because you want everything to be a splash panel, but you can't do that. So you have to make choices, and you got to pull back some things in favor of others. Once that's all worked out in the layout, which is where I feel like most of the real work happens, then you go through and decide, what reference do I need? And for me, there's two main categories of reference. There's, what does this helmet look like? What does this tank look like? Like, that's one kind of reference where you just need to be accurate, especially if it's a period piece. And then the other kind of reference is specifically, how is that fist going to look when it's flying at you? What is the lighting going to look like? What time of day is it? What are the colors? Like that kind of thing. And then once you have all that collected, that's when you really go to town on the penciling. And the penciling just, it tightens up the layouts. And then from that point, it can either go to my, ink and color style, or it can go into the painted style. In the case of Mythos, it was painted. So I do an underpainting first. And at that time, I think I was doing it in gray. I change it all the time. I'm always looking for a way to speed things up, and nothing ever works. But you do an underpainting. Now I do it mostly in sepia, in gouache. And once that's all figured out, and the reason you do that is really to firm up the drawing and work out the lighting. And then once that's done, then you bring in the color. And, I'm thinking back now to Mythos, like each one of those books was done differently. Like there were 6 books in all, and I didn't have anything figured out until probably Spider-Man, which came out in around 2007. Yeah. So I did, Captain America was the last one. Spidey and Fantastic Four were done roughly the same way. I finally moved back up to 11 by 17. I tried all these things that eventually ended up doing what I should have been doing from the beginning, which is what everyone else does, which is 11 by 17 board on paper, easily scanned, because I tried everything and nothing else worked except for what everyone else was doing, and with good reason. So yeah, that's basically the whole process. It's pretty long and involved. On Cap, I think I finished that in about 6 months, but I was doing other covers at the same time. The fastest one I did was Spider-Man, which I did in about 3.5 months.
In your blog, the Self-Absorbing Man, which, by the way, listeners, I can't recommend highly enough, because Paolo puts an enormous amount of detail into his creative process. But you talked about the amount of painstaking research that went into illustrating the Captain America Mythos book. And in particular, I'd love for you to maybe walk listeners through a little bit about, in particular, you talked about going to the Lower East Side Tenement Museum and how you use that as a basis of research for Steve's apartment when he was a kid. Can you talk us through a little bit how that visit and how that research helped influence the way the book looked?
Yeah, at the time, I was living in New York, so I tried to get out when I could. It was funny, I couldn't always. Sometimes I'd just be looking on Google Maps, but that was one where it wasn't too far from where I was living in Brooklyn at the time. And so I just took the train in, and it was, I don't know, it's just such a different feeling when you actually go to a place and get to actually like be inside the building and see what it was actually like. I can't remember now, like, I don't remember if there was a particular photo that I took, but it was more just an overall sense of claustrophobia. They're not huge, like they're big buildings. They're all like, several stories, but the individual apartments are all pretty tight. And, of course, you're never in there with just one family. It's always a lot of people in one space. And, with Steve Rogers, like, he's supposed to be there. He's this young kid, and like he doesn't, there's a scene right at the beginning where his mom dies, and I just I don't know, like I saw that bed. And so for me, like it was those little details of the period pieces that I would never have been able to find online. And there's a lot of stuff where you have to take artistic license, where you'll find something, a design that you like, and you're like, I got to use this, but you don't really know if it's period specific. Like there are ways to do that, but if you're on a movie or a TV show, like that would be someone's entire job, is just like figuring out those props and whatnot. And so when it's just you, like you have to take certain liberties just to kind of get the thing done. But that was one instance where you could go to one place, look at everything around you and see like, this is how it was, and this is how I'm going to make it look. So it was very helpful. And also I remember the guy who gave me the tour ended up being a huge comic book fan. I don't know if he ever did this, but during our tour, he said he wanted to create a comic book inspired tour of the Lower East Side, because so many of the creators were just from New York and that whole area. Like, he was naming off like where Jack Kirby lived and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if he ever did it.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
They're usually popular, right? I would think, particularly around convention time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I agree with Bob about the blog, and I highly recommend budding artists or even those who are just fascinated with the steps behind the creation process. Check out paulorivera.blogspot.com. I mean, he has a great reoccurring bit that he calls Wacky Reference Wednesdays. And it was fascinating to see, for Mythos, Captain America, where he shared, the images he staged or the references he used for his art. And speaking of which, I have to ask you, who is Captain Catastrophe?
That is he's I guess we've been together now 20 years. How to think of it. He is a 12-inch GI Joe doll that I bought around the year 2000. He came with me to Rome, and my roommate at the time, Ryan Brown, who's also a comic book artist, he named him Captain Catastrophe, because I would bring him, for reference, but usually when anyone ever visited the studio, they can't help but like pose him and who knows, whatever strikes their fancy at the time. So he was always a mainstay in my studio, and I guess he still is. I should keep him out, but he's tucked in a drawer right now. But yeah, that's where the name came from. And Ryan Brown, we've been friends now for over 20 years. We went to the same school, Rhode Island School of Design, and now he's got a book out, 8 Billion Genies, which I'm actually working on a cover for that right now.
Oh, cool.
And I think the series just got picked up by Amazon. I don't know any of the details, but that's pretty exciting.
That's cool. Well, you'll have to thank him for us. That we love the idea. So just, for Mythos, let's talk about the challenge, right? You said that, Captain America Mythos took you 6 months. And so part of that, I think, because of the research you had to do, because it is a period piece, a history piece, really. I mean, World War II, you had to be realistic there. But also the diversity of the settings, right? I mean, you had Brooklyn, you had Europe, you had Russia, you had Africa. Can you talk about that challenge?
Just a lot of Googling, basically. I did have a couple books. There was one in particular that was, it was just all reference photos of the guys in the correct uniforms for where they, what theater of war they were in. And I'm pretty sure the book was made for, now you would call them cosplayers, but at the time, war reenactors, like those kind of guys. And so, better photos than you'd find anywhere on the internet, because it's just guys who, like, they owned a tank, or at least they knew a guy who owned a tank. And so they're all posing in the actual like gear, and it's great photos. Like they actually went out in the mud and everything. Like they had the ladders that they brought, to Omaha Beach, to like,
Oh, wow.
the ones you carry on your back and then you put them together under heavy Nazi fire, just to climb up. It's staggering to think about that. I've been there. I've been to that beach, and it's just crazy. But yeah, I mean, that's where I got a lot of that stuff. It was from the guys who were really into the just the uniforms and the weaponry and all that kind of stuff. I still have the book, and it's a fantastic resource. And I had another book that was like from Time. It's just a nice basically timeline of the entire war, along with like little bits and pieces and photos and captions. And like they have a piece on Alan Turing, and Enigma codebreakers, like just like little bits and pieces. And I had heard stuff before about certain people, but that just kind of really brought it all together, and it just became more of a, I don't know, more purpose to my research of just the enormity of World War II. Still just staggering, especially in light of today's events. It's just like it never ends. Like you think this stuff is over, but there's always some dude out there who's just like rubbing his hands together. It's just like, when can I make my move? But
that's true.
Anyway.
Yeah. So I wrote you after I bought page 21 of Captain America Mythos, and just again to thank you, because it is my favorite telling of the Captain America origin story. I mean, there's dozens out there, but that one really has always stood out to me and meant a lot to me. And I wanted to thank you. And you wrote back and said that you shared some things with me in that email about that page and the research that you did at the VFW Post. And the guy sitting, I think, to the right of Steve Rogers when he's dining. Could you share some of that with the listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words, and thank you for getting that page. So again, back in at the time I was doing CAP, I was in New York. I was living in Brooklyn, and I went on Google and search for VFW Post just to see like if I'd get any hits. And the one that I got surprised me, because it was at the Armory, which is huge building in the middle of Manhattan. And it actually ended up being where I think they have some comic book conventions regularly there now, because it's a huge space. Like, they've got like Hummers parked inside. But to the side of that, there is an actual legit VFW Post. And so I went there, and I just kind of hung out outside until I saw somebody in uniform. And I asked the guy, it's like, how do I get in there? And he's, he invited me in and showed me around. And it was just an amazing experience, because, they had a bunch of stuff that was, actual relics and stuff from World War II. And the thing that struck me about the whole visit that I wouldn't have gathered otherwise is that they had done like murals, because it is this big meeting space where they have big tables and everything. But they had murals from basically every war that regiment had fought in. And it's just crazy. Like, I don't know who did the murals, but it immediately put the idea in my head, like, in the comic and in Jenkins' script, Steve Rogers is an artist. Like, he keeps a sketchbook. And so I wanted to subtly suggest that maybe he could have done it. I didn't make it explicit, but I think what it was. Oh yeah. So in the very first few pages, I have him drawing a rose, and then I put that rose in the mural. And I don't know if it's on the page that you have, but it's among those pages that I did that. And then the other like detail that I don't think I would have done had I not visited was the tables. being put up. So, if you had told me to draw a VFW post, I would have, come up with a room, and I would have lots of tables and chairs and everything. And when I got there, they had all those tables and chairs, but they're all put up on the side because, they're not having an event. And to me, like, it was just perfect. Like, as soon as I walked in that room, I was like, because the whole book is about these guys. And Steve Rogers is like, he's not getting older.
Yeah.
And the rest of his friends are, and it just
Yeah,
it's
really powerful.
Really is, and to see that generation kind of pass, really. And so to do that story when you and Paul did was a very timely story, in the fact that here's a last chance that we can tell this story. We're actually capturing, plausibility of when, these real live men could still be with us, and celebrate them. And also
exactly.
the sadness that those tables were up against the wall because they weren't celebrating, right? There wasn't a lot there going on anymore.
Right.
Very solemn and very respectful. So it came across beautifully in your work.
Thank you. That's what I was trying.
Yeah, and we talked about that. I mean, we covered Mythos in a recent episode, and we talked about those particular scenes at the VFW post and how they changed over time. And I mean, it was. Rick and I got awfully choked up about it actually when we talked about it, and I know our listeners did when they listened to the episode.
All right, so and that's fine. Bob can own his one page, whatever. I'm actually the proud owner of these 3 pages.
Oh wow, yeah.
So pages 5, 7, and 8.
Wow.
Yeah, I got these a few months ago. And
thank you.
I could not be more thrilled because these are this is Steve being, shot down and then being approached by the general, and then he's volunteering. He's in there with Dr. Erskine, and then he actually transforms into the super soldier, and Dr. Erskine's shot. I mean, these are beautiful pages, and I feel so very fortunate. And I look at these, and we were talking before about the movie The First Avenger, right? And the 1941 set in the movie looks like it was taken directly out of this comic and your designs. I don't know. I don't know chicken and egg.
I don't know about that, but you know what I do love, like my absolute favorite from that movie. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to love from it, but when he steps up and he looks in the mirror, and his face isn't even big enough to hit the reflection. It's just like so good.
Right.
It's just perfect. And then the other thing I love about the movie is, like, I saw that, again, I hit Marvel at just the right time. I went there at the Marvel screening. So we were there with, like, my editor, other creators, and just like, we're all just so excited just because Cap was the first one where we're like, can they do this? Like, Iron Man, like, you can make stuff blow up. You can put him in the suit. You can make the Iron Man suit look cool just on its own. But Captain America, like, had to be done right, and they nailed it. And I was sitting next to Dan Slott, writer, and like, we're just squealing next to each other because they showed the Human Torch.
In the glass case, yeah,
and we're just like, the whole time. And, we were like that the whole time, but that time I think we even like grabbed each other. Just couldn't believe it, because they just nailed it, and they knew the source material, and it was just perfect.
Yeah. and you had the opportunity to do the movie poster, right? For
Oh
the
yeah,
for
yeah,
three
yeah,
Cap movies. And
yeah.
so tell us about that. And then also,
I'm
was that
I'm crossing my
challenging?
fingers for the fourth.
Yeah.
Oh,
Where we'll see. I never know because I don't get the call until it's like too late. But
yeah, we need
I'm
this
hoping.
tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. I'm hoping they call me back, but we'll see. We'll see. I'm sorry. What was the question?
Well, it's just so cool that because and if the listeners haven't seen these movies, just Google, Paulo Rivera, Winter Soldier movie poster, or Civil War movie poster, or whatever, or First Avenger, because they're beautiful. They're absolutely beautiful, and I imagine they were challenging because you had to use real life likenesses of the actors. I mean, is that tough?
Oh, it's insane. Like I never take my own advice, which is to only use the reference that I'm given for the movie. Like when I'm doing a comic, it's a little different because I'm not trying to make it look like a specific person. I'll do. I've got my Captain America,
There
head
he
right
is.
here. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the man.
That's it.
Like that. I'll when I did Mythos, I sculpted that because I wanted a specific look. I can't even remember the actor's name that I based it on some like old school actor I had never even heard of. But what I always end up doing is I'll like one photo they give me, but I'll want it just a little bit different. And the thing is like you don't have Chris Evans in front of you. You can't tell her like, can you look up this way a little bit?
Yeah.
So it always ends up being this like really difficult process of just like me squinting and saying, does that look right? I don't know. And often what happens is I'll find the angle in one picture that I like, and I'll find the lighting I like in another picture.
Mhm.
And then it's just a process of mapping that, one onto the other. And it's really hard. It takes a lot of time and just a lot of second guessing, I guess. Where I'll just do it and say, does it work? I don't know. And then I'll do it again. It has gotten easier. I'll show you another one. So now I bought this off eBay. It's a little Hot Toys 1/6 scale. I think it's bootleg. I don't think they're supposed to sell these, but I have a whole host of them. And so now I've got likenesses for Chris Evans, and I've got one for him in the helmet as well. So
Nice.
if they do ask me to do the one for Captain America: New World Order, I'll have to buy an Anthony Mackie one,
Right.
and go from there.
Can you
But,
the one that you actually did yourself? Can you show that again? I want to
yeah.
better
So
image
I
of
make
that.
these out of Super Sculpey, which is just a polymer clay.
That's cool.
That really is incredible.
We have some of our listeners had submitted some questions, and one of them, Ralph Warner asks, do you do sculpted heads for reference for all your comic art?
I used to, so I've got a whole shelf right there of pretty much everybody who was in Mythos, like all the major characters for Mythos. I did.
Mhm.
Except, I think I used the same one for Johnny Storm as I did for Peter Parker. There's some overlap there. And I did a Ghost Rider one. This was probably my most fun one because I made
that's
it
awesome.
work.
Yeah.
That was pretty
So
fun.
the jaw actually goes up and down, listeners. It's really cool.
Yeah. It's so much fun.
Oh, cool.
I did that back in, I think, 2007. I don't really do it much anymore, just because I can go on eBay and buy like Liam Neeson if I need him.
Oh,
There he is.
and these sculptures are like, they're made the same way, but the sculptors who do these it's just incredible the amount of detail they get into them. Because like I'll put a certain number of hours into it, and then I'll be like, I gotta call it quits. Like I need to start painting. But these ones, like these are, they're pieces of art in and of themselves.
Right.
You just like every nook and cranny, every crease, like even the ears are right. Like,
Uh-huh.
it's just, they're perfect. And so I use these a lot more now. Most recently for what I did, the Walking Dead covers, I had, I got a Denzel Washington one. And so, I'm not making it look like Denzel, but,
Yeah, you're right.
But he's bald,
I
so he makes a good zombie.
yeah, I mean, it's just like, it's just so much easier to do that now. I think I used Henry Cavill for Rick, like all of
Oh, sure,
these,
yeah.
like this is
It
just
does look like Rick.
Yeah,
No,
it's close
not me.
enough.
Not me.
Oh yeah, no.
Yeah. I wish I looked like Henry Cavill. Are you kidding? All right, so let's get back to Captain America Mythos. You mentioned before about the cover and how you like to do like various versions of the cover. So on this cover, you have an image of Cap charging toward the reader, but you get a glimpse of a very scared Adolf Hitler in the reflection
As
of
he
the
should
shield.
be.
Yeah, and you're basically taking the classic cover to Captain America Comics #1 by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, but you're providing a different perspective. So how did you come up with that idea?
I wanted to paint Hitler getting punched. I knew there
First
was only
person.
one way I could do it. Yeah, exactly. I because there's certain things that they'll allow on the cover and other things that they won't. Like I don't think now on like Marvel Comics they don't want any swastikas. Like you can punch a Nazi, but they don't want a swastika on the cover. That kind of thing. I don't know what the rule was back then, but I had enough sense to say like there's another way to do this. And so I showed that to my editor, Steve Wacker. He loved the idea, and so we went with it. But the funny thing was, and then this got mentioned actually just randomly today on Twitter. There are two versions of Mythos Captain America out there, and one uses the unedited version of the cover. And the reason it got edited is because I finished the cover and I sent it in, but then I also sent it to my dad just to show him, look what I made, Dad.
Mm-hmm.
And he immediately wrote back to me. He's like, Hitler's hair is parted the wrong way. I'm like, you didn't even look that up, did you? It's kind of scary, Dad. And I had switched it because he's wearing like the Sam Brown belt. I don't know what they call it in Germany at the time, but Sam Brown belt here. I had switched that. I had switched everything else on his uniform, but then I had forgotten to do the hair. And sure enough, my dad saved me, and then I immediately repainted it and then sent in the edited version to my editors. And then, but the original one got printed somewhere. I don't know why or how, but it's a different version. It actually has different title on it. But yeah, my dad saved me. He saved me a couple times on like stuff like that, where I just something completely went over my head just because I had been staring at it for too long, or it was becomes something I just totally didn't know.
That's just like a
Thanks.
dad, right?
Yeah, it's like, thanks, Dad. Keep me from embarrassing myself.
So your collaboration with your dad on Volume 3 of Daredevil is well known. What's it like to collaborate with your own dad?
It's awesome. I owe him some work. I haven't given him much this year, but it's always a pleasure because he just I send him. The process is I scan in the work here. I send it to him. He's still in Daytona Beach, Florida. Actually, they're about to get slammed by Hurricane Ian, so he's not going to do any work this week. And then he prints it out in a blue line and inks on top of it. And this was all like he started back in 2011. Like for those of you who don't know, he does custom motorcycles and like mostly paints on vehicles and stuff. But back in 2011, we just wanted to see if it could work, and it did. And again, he hit the ground running that time, and he ended up getting, I think, best inker that year. It's like,
wow, good for him.
It was a rookie year, old man rookie. But yeah, and now like he actually gets more work from my friend Joe Quinones than I do, just because I've been spending my time doing stuff from Marvel Studios and whatnot. But I will be sending him some work very soon, including the 8 Billion Genies cover for Ryan Brown, and then a couple other ones that haven't been announced yet.
So, all right. So getting back to Mythos, like Bob said, we covered that in the last episode, and him and I were talking about this. In the beginning of the issue, you have a young Steve Rogers standing in front of the Army recruiting office, and he's standing in a very distinctive pose, right? So he's got with his hands like holding his lower back, and he's kind of standing like this. And it's not a pose one sees very often. Was there a reason behind that? Because we see him back in this pose a couple pages later, and I had a theory on it, and Bob had a theory on it, and I just was curious of why you drew him like that.
I want to hear your theory first.
All right,
before I give you the answer.
Because I think Paul's script is like you said, amazing, right? And so we go from this page, which has multiple panels on it of different time periods, and so we're going back and forth between modern Steve's telling the story and him thinking back to him as a kid standing in the same spot on the same street in front of the RFW, right? But back then it was the recruiting office, and then you go back to when he's about to walk across the street to go try to volunteer. And I thought maybe him standing like that was your way of saying, this is the same point in time, right? From a couple pages earlier, whatever it was, to now, here's a young Steve standing in that pose, and that's how you bring it back. But Bob's like, no, that's just how they stood back then.
Well, no, I don't think that was the tenor of my statement. I don't disagree with anything you said. I just thought it was a very period Pacific stance. And I've seen a lot of old photographs where men sort of stood like that with their hands sort of tucked in behind their backs like that, which is not a way that you generally see people, loitering around in modern times.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited that you guys even noticed that at all. So you're right. The main thing is like it serves as a transition from I just had the pages up. So we're talking about page 1 to page 2. So we're going, page 1 is just going back in time. And you should know panel 2, that's my dad in the foreground.
That's awesome.
Before he had a beard. I've actually never seen my dad's face. He's always had a beard as long as I've known him, but that's him before he had a beard. So I have Steve in the final panel of that, and then it transitions to the next page. And he's standing the same way. So I wanted, continuity there. But the second kind of detail about that is that only super skinny people can stand like that. So if you see anybody like, at rest with hands on hips, like I don't ever do that. Like I'm not super big, but I like to stand like that. It's not comfortable. And I think it's only comfortable if you're like super duper skinny. But secondarily, I did see more people standing like that back in the day. But I think there were also a lot more skinny people back then. I think there was literally less food to eat back in the 40s, especially some of those lean years.
Still so true, right?
I like to stand with my hands on my love handles. That way it kind of hides it.
Just grips them.
I don't think most Americans can even do that now. But yeah, so it's like kind of all those things are tied into just, and the book is filled with just like little things like that where I'm surprised and delighted that anyone notices, but that's part of the fun for me of just creating a world like that where it is all these tiny little details.
Right. You actually in your blog also you referenced the amount of research you did for the tomato paste cans, right? That Steve's moving off of the dock, right? And then you painstakingly paint the labels on the can. So yeah, I mean the little details. But later in the book, you have this absolutely beautiful double page splash of Cap fighting alongside the Avengers. And in your blog, you shared that you saved this piece for last, but by doing that, it only left you like less than a week to complete. And then Jenkins' script left the details of the battle up to you. Talk about how you got this done in time, and then how Tom Brevoort helped you pick Avengers 100 as the inspiration.
Yeah, well, I mean, Tom Brevoort, I just kind of like, I lucked into him when I first started out. Like, he's the one that I worked with from the beginning. And, even back then, he was his own Marvel institution. Like, he's just the guy you go to. He's been there forever, and he's still there. And he's, he just has an encyclopedic knowledge. And, if we're, it's basically like him and Mark Waid. Like, if you have a question about comics or a superhero, those are your two guys. And, it almost doesn't matter whether Marvel, DC, or really anything else. Like, they can tell you the answer. So, I saved the spread for the end just because, part of it is, it's like running cross country. It's like, it's a mental game. You kind of play with yourself. Like, you set these goals for yourself, and you have an idea once you've done it enough times, like where it's going to be really tough, where it's going to be a slog, and where things are going to, where you're going to need to speed up. And, it's always going to be tough at the end. You're just not going to have enough time. And so you're probably not going to be sleeping very much. And so you just need some kind of motivation just to stay awake, basically. And, that's why I leave a spread like that, because I'm just like, all right, I get to paint Captain America. Oh, wait, and there's Vision. Oh, and there's Wanda. Like, you just get to keep going for a whole week, and you need that kind of motivation every single hour. And so that's really, like, that's why I left it for the end, and that's how I was able to do it. Because I think I only had 1 week, and I just, when I told Tom Brevoort, I was like, I want to paint everybody. Like, this is my one chance. I've got to paint everybody. And he's like, well, here's your answer, Avengers number 100. And at the time, I didn't even know who Black Knight was, but that's kind of like my first introduction to him. And so they sent me the issue and kind of gave me an idea of what was going around, and I just went from there. It was a whirlwind week, and I barely finished, but I just barely made it.
I cannot believe here it is, 14 years later, and it's still available for sale. I mean, Paulo has 6 pages from this story still available, and this double page splash is one of them. So I listen, listeners.
It's because it's too expensive.
Well, listen, if I had the money, I'd have these 3 pages and that double splash. But check out splashpageart.com for details. You can go on there, do a little search for Paolo Rivera, and he's got so much art on there. It's amazing. But yeah, that double page splash, someone needs to get that.
Rick, what are you doing, man? I've been saving my money, and now you just gave away the store. Now I gotta pull the trigger on another page in like less than 2 weeks or something.
I'm sure your wife wouldn't mind.
Oh my God!
You don't need that car.
Well, I'm down. Paulo, I'm in Florida too, so hurricane coming. Maybe I'll just use that insurance money.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just wait until after the hurricane hits to send it. Mail always is pretty bad right around then. When it comes to the pages, it's so interesting, like the way we price all that stuff. Like if it's a big splash page, it usually goes for more. But sometimes I'll personally like a page, and I just won't want to sell it, and so I'll jack up the price. And my art dealer will be like, why is this like that? It's like, oh, I like the way I did the clouds there. And like, nobody else cares, but I just don't want to sell it. It's one of those things. So it's a fun mix, but just between the two of us. And, he's been my art dealer for, again, over 20 years, almost 20 years. It's weird that I'm like a comic book veteran at this point, but 20 years this year. Yeah, it was June of 2002.
Nice.
Crazy.
Wow. It is crazy. So here's a bit of a what if question for you. So we all loved, I mean, the original 6 Mythos books, fabulous. Captain America, I'm partial, my favorite. But if they asked you to do it again, could you, what 6 characters would you pick to do their origin stories?
Well,
let's say you already did these 6. You already did these 6 and you get to do 6 new ones.
Yeah. When we did it, the original plan was 8. So in the pipeline, when Captain America had just finished and unfortunately they canceled the series, we were going to do Doctor Strange and Iron Man. And I still, obviously wish we had. So those right off the bat, like that's, and again, Jenkins had like just a great take on Doctor Strange. And I didn't really know much about him. And that's why Mythos was just such a great project for me, because like I'm learning the entire time that I'm doing it, both, in the case of Captain America, both about the character and also history. And so each one was an opportunity to, basically fall in love with the character. So, Doctor Strange, Iron Man, and I actually did, I think I posted them. I did mock-ups for the covers, kind of staying within the kind of like the graphics that we had gone with for the rest of the Mythos series. I think I even did a Punisher one where it's just like it was just him and just like casings everywhere. What else did I do? I can't remember. But anyway, Iron Man, Doctor Strange, those are my top ones. I had really wanted to do a Silver Surfer one. Like that was the one that it wasn't ever planned, but I was like trying to push it the entire time just because I love him as a character, and just to paint him is it's just so much fun.
I would love to see you painting a cosmic story with, different worlds. Wow, that would have been great.
Yeah. I mean, it's just from a purely art standpoint, like it would just be so much fun. And it's also interesting. Like I think I would do it much differently now than I would have back then. Like Cap, I would do the same way, but my Silver Surfer would be a very different, just a different look than I would have back at the time. Those guys, Black Panther for sure. And I'm doing 6. I've got 4, right?
Mm-hmm.
I got 2 more.
We're making
easy
a
to come up with it when I don't.
I know.
Well,
I know. I can
always
almost
comes down to,
smell
like,
it from here.
You know what I really like? One of the things that I wish we had done, I wanted a part 2 for the X-Men.
Okay.
So I would have loved to do, because I love the original X-Men, but they're not the ones I grew up on. I'm a 90s kid. So
yeah,
for me, I wanted, kind of that Dave Cockrum, Jim Lee, kind of like a mix between the two. So I would have loved to do an X-Men Mythos number 2, because I feel like it would have been different enough. And plus Magneto is just always fun to draw. He's such a great villain. So I'm going to count that as my 5th one.
All right.
And then my 6th one.
All right. How about I help you with this one? Because I would love to see you, because you draw beautiful women. Is there a female character out there, maybe?
Mary Jane number 1. she should get her own.
She should definitely. I'd like to see you paint her.
Yeah, and that was actually like, that's kind of the reason that I wanted that one spread in Mythos Cap, because I knew that was my only chance to kind of do it the Avengers. And if you do the Avengers, you get to do a bunch of great female characters, and I knew that was just like my only chance. But yeah, I've said it before. Like I'd love to do just a high fashion MJ.
Would you paint her like those French women of yours?
Yeah, it's like she's just fun to draw. Like it never gets old. But and to show how much things have evolved. Like I'd love to do like a Spider-Gwen now. Like she's enough of a character on her own that I would love to do her mythos. Or even Miles Morales. Like, and what's interesting, like, my kids are 3 and 7. They love Spidey and his amazing friends, and it's just those 3 characters just getting into, and it's little kid stuff. But for them, there will never be like, oh, Peter Parker was the first. Like it's those 3, and they're all co-equal. So I'd love to do ones of them.
Oh, you mean there won't be a whole bunch of fanboys saying we got to stick with the original?
Yeah, I don't even, I ignore most of it. And unfortunately, like when it comes to social media, I don't pick fights, and nobody pick fights with me yet. Now that I say that, they're all
don't challenge
for me. Every once in a while, they will come out of the woodwork, but I don't block. I mute. I don't want those guys to even know that I know that they exist. Honestly,
that's a good way to go.
It's not it's not always effective, but for me, it's been an effective strategy.
Paolo, I just want to let you know, a month ago, Rick, maybe a month and a half ago, you posted that picture in the Captain America fans Facebook group of you striking that Silver Surfer pose in your old comic shop. Right. So if you need like a life model for your Silver Surfer painting, I think, Rick he's available.
I will take that information and put it in a folder.
All right.
big reference folder that I keep right by my desk.
The round file. That's called the round file. So we have another listener who submitted a question. Grant Ball asks, having illustrated comics in both paint and traditional pencil ink, what are some of the different advantages and difficulties for each medium in comics?
First of all, it's kind of the same. Like if you can do, in order to paint, you have to have that first skill. So like the drawing, the ink, and the penciling, that's like your baseline. You have to be able to do that in order to paint. What I always tell any of the young kids who ask me about painting comics, I say, first draw one. Because again, I wish I had taken my own advice. It's just so hard. Like drawing comics is hard enough. Painting them as well, there's like literally only a few people who could do it. And I do not include myself in that list because I can't do it on a regular basis because it kills me. Like I'm not fast enough. I'm not even fast enough to do pencils and ink. Anyway, the most important thing I can say is that when I made the switch in 2008 from painted comics to inked, the inking made my painted stuff better because it forces you to make better compositions and to increase the contrast of your art while not sacrificing clarity. So one of the nice things about painting is you can gray things out, which is in a lot of instances the easy way out, because you can kind of play with contrast to move things back or bring them forward. You can use color to do things that you wouldn't be able to with black and white. But with black and white, those are your 2 options. And so your composition has to be rock solid. And so I often, recommend that to painters, like do some black and white art because it will make your drawing better, and then the drawing will make your painting better. So that's where it really helps me, I think. From the standpoint of my career, painting was a great thing for me because it got my foot in the door. I think that if I had tried to break in as a standard penciler, it would have taken me a lot longer. But because I could paint, it made me look better than I was at the time. And so that got my foot in the door in a way that penciling wouldn't. I still think I would have been able to get in eventually, but I wouldn't have had just the amazing opportunity after amazing opportunity, from the get-go. Starting right at the get, I got in 2002. I was like, get do a Wolverine cover, get to Fantastic Four, and then they give me a issue of Spider-Man. Like that would not have happened. I'm pretty sure like that would not have happened if I were just a straight up penciler. I may have gotten those opportunities later on, but it wouldn't have been so early.
So I'd like to ask this question of our guests, Paolo, and because the multiverse is super big now, right? In the cinematic universe, but in the comics as well. Mm-hmm. And I got to think there's a variant out there of you that never went into comics, right? Did something else. What's that variant of you doing to make a living?
It's tough to say. Would probably be some kind of like engineer or industrial designer or something like that. Like I do like making things. If it were still art related, I'd be like a toy designer or like a movie effects guy, like a model builder. I think I would have enjoyed that. But non-art related, probably some kind of engineering. Because I do that, like I get that bug from now. Like I love Legos. I love like Technic Legos that just like messing around with that kind of stuff.
I noticed there's a roller coaster model behind you. Is that something you? Yeah. Okay.
It's like it's for my kids.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
he was doing air quotes when he said that.
Yeah. So there's a lot of stuff like that where I would just like buy tools and build things and like that kind of stuff for sure.
Awesome. That's great.
Listen, when we all become dads, that's what we do early on. We're like, little Johnny wants this, and it's really for us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
My 3-year-old needs the 1,000-piece Lego Millennium Falcon.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. My daughter and I do this thing whenever we go to the mall, where she actually holds me back from the Lego store. we always end up there at some point, but whenever we walk by it, I start to kind of trail off and she pulls me back.
That's great.
Oh, that's cute. So what's keeping you busy nowadays? Are there any projects coming up you can share with the listeners?
I try and do about one cover per month. I've got a couple coming up with Boom Studios, like I mentioned, with 8 Billion Genies. And then basically half of my time is spent working for Marvel Studios on the Spider-Man cartoon that's coming out, I think in 2024. That's about as much as I can say, but it's sort of, it's in the MCU, it's Spider-Man freshman year, but it's animated. And if you've seen the images of it yet, it takes heavily from kind of like the 60s animated style, which to me is just like amazing.
Yeah, right.
I love that show, and I love that it exists now almost as a meme in and of itself, sure, independent from the show, and that it's become so popular that they'll actually take like the actors from the latest Spider-Man and have them pointing each other. It's just it's great.
Oh, at the end of the movie during the credits, I think they did that. Yeah,
it's just I love that. So yeah, Spider-Man 67, like. I love that aesthetic, and I'm glad that it's getting a second life.
So I know you can't get into details, but what's your role? Are you in the animation side? Are you in the design side? Like, what's your role?
All I can say is that I can't animate.
Okay.
So that's about as much as I can say, but I can't say that in general that I do not know how to animate it, and it's not something I've ever been interested in. It actually goes back to my dad way back when. Both my parents worked for Disney, like for the park that opened in Orlando back in the 70s. So they have very mixed feelings about just Disney in general. But as a kid, I loved cartoons. I was like, Dad, I want to be an animator. He's like, son, yes, you don't want to do it because you're going to end up, and he specifically said, you're going to end up tweening. It's like, what is tweening, Dad? It's like, it's when you take keyframe animation, 2 different pictures, and you draw the one in between. And, to a kid like that, well, I still get to draw. But now of course I know what he means is that the amount of creativity that you yourself get to do is kind of washed out in that particular job. Now, it is a very particular skill, and it's one I think I could do with some practice. But the reason I like comics is because you can be more of, I guess if it were a movie, you're like the director. You're everyone but the screenwriter. And so you just have a lot of freedom to do, weird things like put people, hold their hands on their hips in a certain way. It's just like, that's in no one's job description, but it's your job if you're making comics. And so that's why I like it. In comparison to animation, this is the first time I've been part of a larger production, and that part is just awesome. It's really nice to work with other people who have similar skill set, but not exactly. And so I think that's something that's always been missing. I've never worked as part of a studio or something. So it's really nice just having that camaraderie with people who know what to ask for. Like that's a new thing for me. Because a lot of times, I've always had great editors, but at a certain point they just say like, I don't know what you need to do here, but this isn't working. Whereas when you're working with other artists, they're like, change this, and this. And you're like, you got it. Like, that's perfect. That's exactly what I needed to hear. And I'll have that done for you in an hour. Like, that's a new experience for me. It's great. Yeah.
We are so fascinated to see what comes next for you. Whatever you do, based on the work you've done so far, it's going to be beautiful. So what are the best ways for fans to follow you?
I'm all over the internet. Just paolorivera.com. That's PaoloRivera.com. And then on social media, I'm Paolo M. Rivera. That's Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube as well. So I try. Those are my main three. I'm also on Tumblr, but it's a hologram of my other stuff. So those are the main three.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show to talk about your career and taking us through Mythos Captain America. We've had fun wrapping cap with you.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for both the support of my original art, but also just such a careful reading of the actual book. Like it really, it's the best part when someone takes the issue seriously with their time and attention. So thank you so much.
All right, Bob, that was so much fun talking with Paolo on the show. He's a super nice guy and super talented as well. I love the stories behind the stories, right? Where he kind of gave some insight into some of the things that he did to really prepare. I had no idea it took him 6 months to do Mythos Captain America.
Right. It would take me 6 years and I still wouldn't get past the cover. That the quality of the work in that book is amazing. But what also amazed me too, Rick, was I heard some things that I hadn't heard before. I asked him to tell me some stuff that was in the email that he sent me, and he talked about two entirely different things, which, and as we talked about that, those first couple pages, there is so much in there. There's the stuff that he talks about on his blog, The Self-Absorbing Man, but I got to believe, as he indicated, that there's so many more Easter eggs in that book. And now I want to tear into it again. And,
I know.
And really drill down to every one of those panels.
I didn't want to admit that I had no idea that he was intimating that Steve painted the mural in the RFW.
Right.
The rose that he put in the beginning and then it shows up at the end. Yeah, that's some inside baseball right there. I didn't know that. And
lots of great stories.
Me appreciate it even more.
Yeah, there's a lot there, and I got to believe there's so much more that it will require careful reading again and again and again to hone in on those things. And I hope we get a chance to talk to him again and find out what some more of those Easter eggs are.
Yeah, that'd be nice. All right, so next episode, 105, we're going way back, Bob. We haven't been back to the 60s in quite some time. I want to say it was episode 75. Can that be right? So yeah, it's time for us to go back to the 60s, and we're going to do not a Captain America comic book.
What?
No, we are going to do Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos number 13, which is the classic issue where it's a World War II story where Captain America and Bucky meet Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos.
That's such a good choice. I mean, it's such a fan favorite book, not only as a collectible, but also just as a book to read, because the story is so seminal to the relationship between Cap and Nick. So I'm really looking forward to that one.
Yeah. Cool story by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. All right, Bob, as always, it's been fun wrapping Cap with you.
Same here, Rick. I can't wait to do it again.
All right. He's Bob Lucius. I'm Rick Verbanis, and you have been listening to another episode of the Captain America Comic Book Fans Podcast.